Hi all, there was a very exciting encounter yesterday between Vishy Anand and Magnus Carlsen, who would have fought many World Championship battles. Magnus Carlsen was on a bit of a low prior to this game, having defaulted on time in the first round. Might have had some emotional or psychological effects, because he actually then lost to Caruana in round 2. And so what would happen here against Vishy? In round 3, Magnus are drawn, so this is round 4. So Magnus on half out of 3 at the start of this game, so quite a bad place to be. He hadn't been in such a bad place maybe since he was a junior, Magnus Carlsen, the current world chess champion. So anyway, so let's see, half out of 3, and Vishy, could he try and maybe put his best game up against Magnus to really make him suffer a bit more in this tournament? So Magnus played e5, and the game goes into a Roy Lopez actually. Instead of knight f6, we have a Roy Lopez, and it kind of goes into a Brea variation by transposition. We see here the hallmarks of the Brea variation coming up. After knight f1, g6, h3, bishop b7, knight g3, and now this knight b8. This was popularized by Spassky. According to Wiki, he had a couple of games, wins against Tau back to back, which popularized the variation. It sort of frees black's c pawn, the knight can reroute. It's a very, very interesting variation, and it seems here white may have maybe a tempo up. According to some sources, already is doing okay here in this position. So d4, because we've got a strange route to get to this position. Knight bd7, a4, and now black plays c5, trying to close up that center. And white often is not too keen to close the center here with d5, because it does mean, for example, c4 and the c5 square can be celebrated by black, and maybe some future queenside counterplay. But this is exactly what Vishy does. He closes that center, makes the game more strategic, less tactical. Hems in this bishop, of course. This bishop, you might think with these dark squares, it would be nice if white could exchange off, in theory, his dark square bishop and try and exploit these dark square weaknesses. So that could form a very important plan here for white. For the moment, black plays c4. It seems entirely logical to try and use that c5 square and put pressure on white's center and on the queen side. Bishop g5. Now here, this position is seen in Livebook quite a lot actually. There's over 400 games in Livebook, 484 with h6 even. And h6 seems a very logical move to kick that bishop away before, for example, queen d2 makes h6 impossible. It's a little bit odd that Magnus didn't play h6 here. He actually played a rarer move, only 24 games in Livebook, bishop g7. So this is the point where this is interesting, isn't white got a promising dark square campaign around these key dark squares around Magnus's king. Queen d2. But as we know, Magnus can do a Houdini act from seemingly difficult positions where he seems to be defending. He can very calmly defend and make the attack look like nothing. So white can't be too optimistic here. We see now rook b8, and a very logical looking classic maneuver, knight h2, to go into that g4 square to put more pressure on the pin. Also note here, if white's given enough time, maybe even this kind of maneuver would exert more pressure on f6 and might actually be useful in some variations. We see bishop c8, so simultaneously ideas like b takes to put pressure on b2, and also the bishop might be eyeing g4 usefully. Knight g4. For the moment, there's not so much pressure for the pin for this knight to move away now, and more pressure on the queen side, and again b takes for rook takes b2 is interesting. But here Vishy now, after this move, can play, and he does play, knight h6 check, and actually this is pretty tricky. If king h8, then knight takes f7, winning the queen, and if king f8, then this aforementioned maneuver is actually quite interesting. But first, say A takes, and then rook e3. This is actually quite interesting for rook f3, this position. It seems black's a little bit tied up here. So you might be wondering, the reason I'm showing that is that concession now that Magnus plays, he actually takes off that knight. So it seems as though he's opening up his dark squares for exploitation here. But I think it was a necessary concession. This is maybe an important maneuver to bear in mind if you're playing white here. So bishop takes h6, b takes a4, putting immediate pressure on b2. Now, I'm not sure it's particularly good to take on a4 here. I think there's a specific problem with that, which I'm just going to recheck here. I think there's a specific problem with just taking on a4. I just want to check that. Bishop takes a4. Pardon me. Yeah, maybe, okay, black maybe just plays bishop d7. It's nothing too bad, but bishop d7. So we see Vishy actually playing rook a2. Let's turn this off. Rook a2 is a bit distracting. So he's got this in mind potentially under better circumstances. Bishop takes a4 under better circumstances. And Magnus actually plays a3 here, trying to disrupt white's pawn structure a bit, splintering the pawns. So b takes a3. And then we see knight fd7. And here's the time where, has white got anything on the king side? You could say, well, he's got this trump card, this bishop is unchallenged with the opponent's bishop. But this next move might be causing some fear for a lot of players to play f4, because it seems as though, okay, it's got the f file as a trump card potential, but isn't it giving up the e5 square? It's not entirely clear if this is bad just to take on f4 to get that e5 square for a nice knight on e5. But you can see if bishop g5, there's pressure being built up here, and it might be difficult to parry. You know, queen h4, then later bishop f6. So Magnus decided against this, actually taking on f4. It seems, you know, in some ways quite lucrative to take on f4. He actually played a5. So it's a slight improvement here if f takes e5 for black. Not so developed for white, the initiative, and also, you know, maybe queen h4 later is coming to be useful. Here though we see rook f1, okay, f6, and now instead of any f takes e5, that's not necessary, white plays f5. And actually, if you remember the recent when we went over the Fischer-Spassky match game 5, there was an opportunity instead of f takes to play f5, where the bishop pair is used to kind of squash black on the king side. This is an alternative use of the bishop pair, and it seems analogous here that, okay, white's got the bishop pair, but he doesn't really want to open up the position. He wants to actually gain a bit of space here on the king side and restrict black's defensive resources to be able to defend key points here. And it seems like g6 is an obvious key point. If only the queen could come up and some extra reinforcements, then this would be really dangerous. But we see Magnus trying to distract things quite a lot with knight d3 now. Knight d3. An entrenched aggressive knight in white's position. This isn't tolerated here. It's difficult to tolerate this. In fact, it gives black lots of opportunities if it's just left there. It is actually taken off, but here is a critical moment after c takes d3, where you might think, well, queen takes d3 and let black prove some compensation. This is a major thing, I believe, about chess. We're kind of conditioned for ordinary recaptures, but instead of the ordinary routine recaptures, you know, we have potential for playing very innovative, interesting moves if we consider other alternatives, which can gain time for our attack. And this is one such example, in fact, here, where it's playing into black's hands actually to do the ordinary recapture. There's much greater rewards for exploring other ideas in this position instead of queen takes d3. And And for someone like repetitive like me, sometimes I haven't been experimenting with like technologies. You can consider like recaptures in chess, like the ordinary routine repetitive stuff you might do every day, and sometimes it's good to step out and experiment. But here, this mindset of recapturing we will have, but it will be severely like punished in a way with the check and then bishop a6, and all of a sudden black's got an initiative, and this is not sort of the attack's gone. Black's king safety, the king's not going to be shaking in his boots here on the ordinary capture. So this is the point where in chess we have this big choice often on where we're conditioned to recapture, where we've got to explore some other stuff. And here the pressure point g6 is just saying in theory it would have been nice in another life, instead of this recapture, to put more pressure on g6. But Vishy does actually do this, a fantastic move. He doesn't do queen takes d3. Star move of the game, queen d1. Yes, go to the pressure points. Don't waste time with this. Get the queen to g4, start attacking. He's got the dark square bishop still. He hasn't got the bishop pair. But the light square bishop, has given itself up for this bind on the king side. Queen g4 coming in for the attack and coordination of pieces. Why not? Gigantic opportunities from not recapturing, routinely. So we see here, Magnus under great difficulty here, because not only the queen coming to g4, this rook can switch, to the f file pretty soon to put pressure on f6 if needed in some lines. So we see rook e7, and now this rook does swing. So f takes, and maybe even sometimes an exchange sack might be possible. Let's see, rook f7 defending things, it seems, quite securely. And here is another opportunity. Instead of the ordinary recapture, it seems the engine's like h4, just going for that pressure point again, not wasting time with d3. This would be difficult. If black tries to hold on to d3, for example, queen g4, there's a huge pressure here on black's position. And this position, for example, is looking exceptionally promising. This sort of position here for white. So, black can keep his pawn. White's winning d6 here with a big advantage, for example. Yeah, Vishy actually did take on d3 now, though. It does take some guts to leave a pawn like d3 there, and a lot of calculation, but it was actually taken here. But it just shows, we've got a lot of scope in chess. We've got one turn each, us and the opponent. But if we can reprogram our conditioned, reflexes for these recaptures and look at other opportunities, this is a major thing. So anyway, but this is still good for white. There's still significant pressure and coordination here of the pieces. It seems, if black, can try and lock things up, but that's not without consequence here. For example, in that variation I've just mentioned, just to check that again instead of capturing here, if black had tried, for example, g5, h takes, yes, this starts to get horrible like this. For example, g6, it starts to get pretty horrible for black. Okay, so queen takes d3, knight c5, queen f3, and now again, ideas like not here going into the self pin, but there might be some other ideas emerging here to soften up g6. We see bishop a6, and this might be a mistake. Maybe it was better to keep the bishop defensively, trying to slow down white here. Now the queen does put pressure on that sensitive point at the cost of the exchange. And this is another great thing, this is another, instead of the routine moving away from a threat, again, you see similar pattern. If you want to be innovative in chess, you consider other things, you consider experimenting with other ideas instead of what is to be expected. So the rook doesn't move. If the rook had moved routinely, say here, then there's knight d3. If it moves to d1, then g5, and black may be locking down the position here. It takes a lot of effort now to crack this nut. It might not even be that easy anymore in this position. And black's queenside might be developing, black's queenside play. You've got things like queen b6 on the cards, this diagonal coming down. So, and the bishop's actually locked out here. So yes, avoiding routine responses, I think, is a really key thing if we want to be resourceful. And again, so this avoiding the routine response of moving the rook, another star move, queen g4, bring on the attack, Vishy's crying. And here, yes, f takes without losing the queen is possible because the bishop's left c8. So in a way, you know, g6 is even more sensitive than before. So is this a slight mistake here? We see g5. And now h4 trying to rip through to Magnus's king. But is Magnus going to do a Houdini act from here? An escape act? Bishop takes f1. He takes that exchange up. Rook takes f1. But black is under severe pressure here. All of white's pieces are pretty well coordinating. Even the rook, you know, if it ever, you know, takes, there's f6 supported by the rook. So all the pieces are having a party over here. Queen d7. What else? You know, this is getting really out of hand, this position. So queen d7, h takes, f takes, and now instead of queen takes g5, you might expect, we see queen h5. And there's a specific idea here of f6 and to play knight f5. So it's sort of getting out of this virtual like pin to allow f6 to be on the cards. And also you might think, well, queen takes g5 might actually be helping black. It might actually backfire a bit. If black gets in rook g8, then this g file might be kind of, you don't want this to backfire and for black to be using that. So black's not given too much time here. Magnus does try and wriggle, you know, rook to g8 here, but after f6, white is trying to get his exchange back at the very least, and this knight coming to f5 is very nice, you know, with this idea of bishop g7. We see rook g8. So materially here, white is currently a pawn up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he actually just wins back his exchange. Okay. And losing a pawn there in the process. So 5 pawns each. But after knight f5, this is horrible for black after knight f5, hitting the queen. Where can the queen go? If the queen goes to d7, for example, then knight h6 is actually quite crushing with knight f7. Forget about e4. Black's king has had it. Just to show, for example, check and mate. So this can't be allowed. In fact, the queen can't just step away here that easily. And queen f8, same thing. Knight h6. It's a very unpleasant position. There's no major trick or anything. So this is the position which Vishy headed for, which is like equal on pawns, but with knight f5. Is actually a killer move. It actually wins material, in fact. Magnus played queen g6. You might not think, well, is this a big deal? After queen takes, though, rook takes, white plays knight e7. Awkward. Because if rook g7 now, then rook f8 is mating. Ouch. If here rook here, then this is still no good. Check. And let me see this position. Actually, I should have checked this out before. Let's just make sure what's going on here after rook h6. Seems like a plausible defensive move. Check. Alright, this position actually white's just better with rook c8 apparently. So knight f5 is on the cards. So this will be good for white. So it seems Magnus felt compelled to give up the exchange rather than face this kind of position. Knight takes d6 here. Okay, so some other tactics here. This could lead to basically a winning rook and pawn ending. So it's interesting that resource though. Yeah, rook h6 here isn't particularly appetizing for that particular reason. Rook h6. It's one of the top 4 moves, but yes, it doesn't lose the exchange. Instead, it just seems to be bad rook and pawn ending here implied. Yeah, so that's very interesting. Or bad ending, white's just basically infiltrating quite badly here and winning material. But knight takes d6 or rook c7 there. So it's interesting. Magnus gave up the exchange actually with king g7. So this was taken. So the exchange up. Is there any tricks here left? Rook f8. This ending is interesting. So letting the e pawn go, but White's going to try and maybe get the a pawn. Running past a pawn will be winning here. So Black doesn't play knight takes e4. He actually plays a4. Now we see c4. So again, it's tempting maybe to take on e4, but the pawns are going to start dropping if knight takes e4. Instead, h5 was played. Knight takes e4. Let's just check this out. Say this here, rook d6, and that d pawn is dropping. How does Black defend this? Let's check again. This position, just to make sure of the stuff. Sorry. So after a4, c4. Okay, say knight takes e4. Magnus didn't play this. Rook a8. We'll say knight c5, protecting a4. No, actually, forget trying to use the rook here. This position. Let's just move the king. This position here. Check. Then here. So depriving the knight of e4 basically by getting the king here, and now the rook's showing its superiority. That d6 pawn will drop, and with that, yeah, White will have a passed pawn there. So yeah, it's not so clear cut just to use the rook here. If you're wondering, so knight takes e4. It's not possible just to use the rook because otherwise, if we play rook d8, then knight e4. So actually here. Starting to use the king is important. So with king f2, but this is similar to the game continuation actually. Anyway, in the game, so a4, c4, h5, not bothering to take on e4. We just see king f2. So we're going to get a similar thing. The king is going to guard that e4 square away from the knight. And here actually on move 47, Magnus resigned. So if he took, let's just imagine he takes king e3, then we've got a similar position now where the rook can forcibly win the d6 pawn. So rook d8, for example, and now we see superiority demonstrated finally with rook d7. That d6 pawn is dropping here, and with that, that's pretty convincing. That's enough for Black to feel it's futile here. We've got two connected pass pawns, maybe throwing a check and rook c8, and it's, for example, like this. And these two pass pawns are surely going to be crashing through. So yeah, Magnus resigned here after king f2. He didn't test knight takes e4. So king f2, we're sort of transposing into the same sort of thing. The king coming to e3 helps the rook show its superiority. But yeah, fascinating game. And puts Magnus Carlsen, the current world chess champion, on half out of 4. What's happening? I've noticed some Reddit discussions about this, and someone actually got a bit maybe overly downvoted on Reddit for suggesting there's some psychological consequences of the round 1 forfeiting on time. But Vishy Anand also apparently has given an interview where he might have talked about that as well, the psychological impact of a freak event like losing on time in the first round. Probably hasn't helped Magnus's play, but on the other hand, of course, Magnus has been playing Black against the best players in the world, professionals. But yeah, I think that for me, that of course it seems as though that must be an ingredient, surely, because Magnus is statistically never on this kind of score. So I think something has happened, and he suggested he wanted to play the next day instead of being a rest day. But I think his team would welcome a rest day to kind of regroup things. So it's an incredible circumstance, this tournament, where the current world chess champion now resides on half out of 4. Unbelievable. And Vishy, showing a fantastic game here, but one which also this deeper concept in chess that when we're encouraged to do routine moves, the expectations of the opponents and us is set lower. We're into this routine thing. And if we think, well, instead of this ordinary recapture, what major opportunities might exist? Or instead of moving something away from a threat, what major opportunities exist? We can sometimes come up with, very innovative, aggressive ideas fueled by the extra moves that you've saved from not doing the routine stuff. So I think that's like chess's equivalent of experimentation and innovation is just there. Instead of doing the routine stuff, think about doing some other stuff. There are clear pressure points in black's position, and these very important moves like Queen G4, not trying to win material back immediately, which would leave black with a lot of tempo gains in some cases, really put black's king side under great scrutiny much quicker. So that's why it's just so important, every move we make, not to be conditioned by what seems to be, routine recaptures or routine handling threats. So anyway, I hope you got something from it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.